two colonels, Gowon and Ojukwu, hugging for the cameras, smiling as if the blood of the 1966 had already been washed away. But behind those smiles were a lethal game of chess. January 4, 1967, a hilltop in Ghana. Ojukwu arrived with a mask of legalism and planning to dismantle the Nigerian Federation. Gowon arrived with a mask of brotherhood, unaware that his own advisors in Lagos were already planning to betray any deal he made. We are exposing the shouting matches, the linguistic traps, and the moment a gentleman's agreement became a death warrant for millions. This isn't just history, this is the autopsy of a country. Before the first word was spoken at Aburi, the war of nerves had already begun. Nigeria was a pressure cooker. Over 1.5 million Igbos had fled the north. In Enugu, Ojukwu was under siege by his own people. The intellectuals, led by men like N.U. Akpan and C.C. Mojeku, were demanding a clean break. They told Ojukwu, if you go to Ghana and come back with anything less than total control over our lives, don't bother coming back. In Lagos, Yakubu Gowon was a man in the middle. He was only 31. He was being pushed by northern hardliners who felt the East was holding the nation's oil to ransom. Gowon's advisors, the Super Pamsecs, Alison Aida, Philip Asiodu, and Solomon Akenzwa, were already drafting Decree 8 before the meeting ever started.
The tapes are available. The records are there. The transcripts are available. But we talked about the Nigerian situation. And certainly, at the end, everybody says, oh, you told them this, you did that. The fact was that our case was so clear that I actually believe at the end of Aburi that the problem was not Gowon, but probably some ambassadors in Lagos who were pressing for something else.
Trust was so dead that Ojukwu refused to fly in any Nigerian plane. He flew in chartered aircraft, fearing the Nigerian Air Force would blow him out of the sky. This wasn't a meeting of partners. It was a meeting of two different countries that happened to share a name. The meeting opened at Peduase Lodge and immediately spiraled into a shouting match. Ojukwu refused to acknowledge Gowon as the supreme commander. He looked across the table and threw a grenade into the room. He said, the hierarchy is dead. Ironsi is dead. No center. And I'm here as the governor of the East, not as your subordinate. The northern governors, specifically Hassan Kassina, were furious. The room erupted. For nearly 2 hours, they didn't talk about peace. They talked about rank. About Ojukwu's tactics, he used this to paralyze the meeting. He made them feel the only way to move forward was to agree to his terms of equality. By forcing Gowon to act as an equal rather than a superior, Ojukwu had already won half of the battle. He turned the Nigerian Federation into a committee of regions. This is the core of the Aburi failure.
Because we understood each other, we agreed on every single point. The drafting was, in fact, my chief secretary with 2 other chief secretaries from the other side. I said, no. And drafted and agreed. We looked at it, we agreed.
Ankrah's role was to provide physical and psychological safety. He didn't just provide a room, he provided a safe zone where the Nigerian colonels could drop their guard. He personally guaranteed Ojukwu's safety, which was the only reason the Eastern delegation agreed to leave Nigeria. Ankrah was the senior to both Gowon and Ojukwu in age and military experience. He used this seniority to manage the tensed moment. When the meeting diverged into arguments over who was the supreme commander, Ankrah was the one who banged the gavel. He famously told them, "You are brothers. If you don't settle this, you will destroy the black man's pride." He played on their shared heritage to force them to shake hands. One of the most debated aspects of Ankrah's role was his passivity. Some historians argue that Ankrah allowed Ojukwu to dominate the room because he didn't want to interfere in the internal affairs of another country.
General Ankrah read over the whole report again to us at the end. Asked us if we wanted to amend anything. No. At the end of all that, the position was so good that actually Ankrah drove Jack Gowon and myself to the airport. Jack was sitting on his left, I was sitting on his right. He was in the middle. And in the course of that journey, at a point, General Ankrah shook his head and said, "Oh, thank you. Thank you. If only we can go on like this, everything would be all right."
Ojukwu, the Oxford graduate, knew that in the room full of soldiers, the man who controls the definitions controls the outcome. Ojukwu famously said he never mentioned Confederation with his mouth, but he didn't have to. He moved a motion that the Supreme Military Council must have the unanimous concurrence of all regional governors for every decision.
Everybody talks about Confederation. Go and look at the transcript. There is no time that the word Confederation came from my lips.
Gowon, wanting to be the perfect gentleman, agreed. He thought unanimity meant unity. He didn't realize that in legal terms, he had just handed Ojukwu a veto power. If Gowon wanted to move troops to protect the oil, Ojukwu could veto it. If Gowon wanted to appoint an ambassador, Ojukwu could veto it. Other governors, David Ejor of the Midwest and Robert Adebayo of the West, watched as Ojukwu systematically dismantled the power of the commander-in-chief. By the end of day one, Nigeria was no longer a country. It was 4 independent kingdoms. When the meeting ended on day 2, there was a solemn agreement. The announcement must be joint. As soon as Ojukwu's plane landed in Enugu, he went straight to the microphone. He beat Gowon to the punch. He released his own version of the Aburi Accord. He released the Aburi tapes, recordings he had prioritized.
Aburi again, because I always end up, this sounds odd today, but I always end up by saying I must have been naive, because I believed actually that would be the end. I'll confess to you, when I got back to Enugu, oh yes, I had a party, believing that probably the danger was over. That's what we thought. Until they then began to deny everything. It was the denial of Nigeria that made me publish the tapes.
The public heard Ojukwu schooling the other governors. They heard the northern governors sounding confused and defensive. It was a PR massacre. Gowon was blindsided and humiliated. He would rather say, Ojukwu should have waited for me.
Came back, and Ojukwu did not go to make the statement he made first, virtually giving the impression that we've agreed for a confederation to move apart, etc., which was really not exactly that.
When the Super Pamsecs in Lagos heard the tapes, they went to Gowon's office. They were brutal. Alison Aida told him, "Sir, you have been outplayed. If you follow this agreement, Nigeria is finished." Lagos then launched a counter-offensive. They drafted Decree 8. They added a clause that allowed the federal government to declare a state of emergency in any region. Ojukwu's response was the final battle cry. On Aburi, we stand. Aburi failed because Ojukwu was too clever to be trusted and Gowon was too trusting to be clever. Ojukwu used the marks of legalism to hide his intent for secession. Gowon used the mask of brotherhood to hide his inability to control his own civil servants. In May 1967, Gowon finally learned Ojukwu's lesson. If you can't win the argument, change the map. He created 12 states, effectively stripping the East of its minority-held oil lands. The last train had crashed.
If I had had the opportunity to make my broadcast in the first, because that was the agreement, not for him to make the broadcast first. Then if I had committed myself to what he said, then there wouldn't have been any problem. But he went and said certain things that certainly looked wrong, and therefore we saw in practically everything he did.
On May 30th, 1967, the Republic of Biafra was born. The war didn't start because the soldiers wanted to fight. It started because the soldiers tried to be politicians and failed.
At Aburi, yes, we agreed on area commands for the armed forces. At Aburi, we agreed that the police force would be decentralized. We agreed on those. Yes. We agreed even to show that we didn't separate. At Aburi, we also agreed on a certain revenue formula. That's what happened at Aburi.
Aburi wasn't a peace treaty. It was the final autopsy. And in the silence of the hilltop of the lodge in Ghana, 3 million people were already marked for silence.
Suddenly I picked up Gowon's hand, put it on Ankrah's lap, brought my other hand, placed it on it, and I said, "General sir, hold us together, I want to say something." So General Ankrah put his hand on top of the two hands, and I said, "General, I want to assure you that I am totally satisfied with everything we said. I will even go further and say to you something I did not say at the conference, and that is that once we have implemented everything we have said, I would ask you for one favor and one favor only, and that would be to be the one to propose Jack Gowon as a head of state of Nigeria."